Welcome to the Archive of Nations, whom are the custodians of the sacred records from time immemorial. Please subscribe and press the notification button, as we have many lessons to educate and empower with a correct narrative of the past to create a lawful blueprint for the future. Welcome to Webisode 11 of the Fallacy of Greece and Rome, entitled Carbon Organic Divinity Becomes the Hybrid Albino Asians Gods. It is advisable that if you have not watched our previous content, that you go back and watch from Webisode 1 entitled The Afarinkas of Mount Olimpo, as we are providing a linear narrative with each webisode building upon the next. Also, please like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy this content, and hit notifications to get notified of our latest content. And remember, these are materials to point you into a direction of ignored study, therefore confirming for yourself these realities. So grab a paper and pen, take notes, and enjoy. The study of ancient religious history is important, for religion, like philosophy, changes but slowly. Institutional religion, being conservative and static in its outlook, has preserved much ancient lore that would have otherwise been lost to the modern student. The Greek philosopher Xenophanes, 480 BC, pointed out a profound truth when he observed that the gods men worship very closely resembles the worshippers. In the words of this ancient sage, each man represents the gods as he himself is. The Ethiopian is black and flat-nosed, the Thracian as red-haired and blue-eyed, and if horses and oxen could paint, they would no doubt depict the gods as horses and oxen. This being the case, when we find the great nations of the world, both past and present, worshipping black gods, then we logically conclude that these peoples are either members of the black race, or that they originally received their religion in toto or in part from black people. The proofs are abundant. The ancient gods of India are shown with Ethiopian crowns on their heads. According to the Old Testament, Moses first met Jehovah during his sojourn among the Midianites, who were an Ethiopian tribe. We learn from Hellenic tradition that Zeus, king of the Grecian gods, so cherished the friendship of the Ethiopians that he traveled to their country twice a year to attend banquets. All the gods and goddesses of Greece were black, asserts Sir Godfrey Higgins. At least this was the case with Jupiter, Bacchus, Hercules, Apollo, Ammon. The goddesses Benum, Isis, Hecate, Diana, Juno, Metis, Ceres, Cybele were black. Anacalypsis, Volume 1, Book 4, Chapter 1. Even the Romans, who received their religion mainly from the Greeks, admitted their debt to Egypt and Ethiopia. This may be well illustrated by the following passage from the Golden Ass or Metamorphosis by Apuleius. The author, as an initiate of the Isis cult, is represented as being addressed by that goddess: I am present, I who am nature, the parent of things, queen of all the elements. The primitive Phrygians called me Presuminitica, the mother or the gods. The native Athenians, Seropian Minerva, the floating Cyprians, Paphian Venus, the inhabitants of Eleusis, the ancient goddess Ceres. Some again have invoked me as Juno, others as Bellona, others as Hecate, and others Rhamnusia, and those who are enlightened by the emerging rays of the rising sun, the Ethiopians, Aryans, and Egyptians, powerful in ancient learning, who reverence by divinity with ceremonies perfectly proper, call me by my true appellation, Queen Isis. From Doan's Bible Myths, note, page 478. A study of the images of ancient deities of both the Old and New Worlds reveal their Ethiopic origin. This is noted by Kenneth R. H. Mackenzie in T. Buckley's Cities of the Ancient World, page 180. From the woolly texture of the hair, I am inclined to assign to the Buddha of India, the Fuhi of China, the Samanikam of the Siamese, the Zaha of the Japanese, and the Quetzalcoatl of the Mexicans, the same, and indeed an African, or rather Nubian, origin. Most of these black gods were regarded as crucified saviors who died to save mankind by being nailed to a cross, or tied to a tree with arms outstretched as if on a cross, or slain violently in some other manner. Of these crucified saviors, the most prominent were Osiris and Horus of Egypt, Krishna of India, Mitra of Persia, Quetzalcoatl of Mexico, Adonis of Babylonia, and Attis of Phrygia. The late Mr. Maynard Shipley, president of the Science League of America, made a very scholarly study of the various mythologies and religions of the world, and in the concluding passage of a brilliant essay, Christian Doctrines in Pre-Christian America, he offers a profoundly thought-provoking statement that the ancient pagan creeds, legends, and myths, part of the universal mythos, should be found embodied in the religion of the ancient Mexican. The original sources of the modern Orthodox Christian religion is by no means inexplicable and need not be attributed to the subtlety of the ubiquitous devil. The explanation is that all religions and all languages of the civilized races of men had a common origin in an older seat of civilization. The evidence seems to show that the original center of culture, referred to by Mr. Shipley, was that vast domain known to the classical geographers and historians as Ethiopia. A study of religious images throws much light on this early civilization. The Tau, which is the T-shaped cross, is thought by many Christians to be a unique emblem of their faith. The fact is that this cross is of ancient Ethiopian origin. In the words of an outstanding student of symbolism, the Ethiopic form of the Tau is an exact prototype of the conventional Christian cross, or, to state the fact in its chronological relation, the Christian cross is made in the exact image of the Ethiopian Tau. Sex Symbolism. Page 9, by William J. Fielding, Little Blue Book number 904. The numerous black Madonnas and infants in European cathedrals are discussed in detail by Sir Godfrey Higgins in the Anacalypsis, Volume 1, Book 4, Chap. I, to which the interested student is referred. However, the remarks of Mr. Shipley on this point are worthy of our attention. Very suggestive is the fact that representations of the Virgin Mother and Infant Savior are often black. This is true in the case of the paintings and images of Isis and Horus, of Devki and Krishna, and in many cases of Mary and Jesus. The most ancient pictures and statues in Italy and other parts of Europe, which are adored by the faithful as representations of the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus, reveal the infant draped in white, but with face black and in the arms of a black mother. How does it happen that the Virgin Mother of the Mexican Savior God so closely resembled the black virgins of Egypt and Europe? Had they not all a common origin? Sex and the Garden of Eden Myth, pages 50 to 51, by Maynard Shipley, Little Blue Book number 1188. Egypt and Western Asia tell the same story. In each case we have a standard or measuring rod of authentic historical record, declares Samuel Lang, of certainly not less than 8,000 and more, probably 9,000 or 10,000 years from the present time. And in each case we find ourselves at this remote date, in the presence, not of rude beginnings, but of a civilization already ancient and far advanced. We have populous cities, celebrated temples, an organized priesthood, an advanced state of agriculture and of the industrial and fine arts, writing and books so long known that their origin is lost in myth, religions in which advanced philosophical and moral ideas are already developed, astronomical systems which imply a long course of accurate observations. How long this prehistoric age may have lasted, and how many centuries it may have taken to develop such a civilization, from the primitive beginnings of Neolithic and Paleolithic origins, is a matter of conjecture. All we can infer is that it must have required an immense time, much longer than that embraced by the subsequent period of historical record. Human Origins, by Samuel Lang, page 30, London, 1913. In myth, Africa appears as a remote and mysterious place. Its people may be marked as different by their appearance and their relationship to the gods. The term Ethiops, meaning Etho, burnt, and Ops, face, identifies carbon organic African peoples as darker skinned than their dark-skinned Greek counterparts. The place name, Ethiopia, can denote the Upper Nile region just to the south of Egypt, plus the Sahara and areas beyond. In the Illiad and Odyssey, Homer's Ethiopians inhabit the edges of the earth, where they are in close proximity to the sun, which has darkened their skin. In addition, they are notable for their privileged relationship with the gods. Related to the notion of the Ethiopians inhabiting the edges of the earth is the use of Africa in myth to indicate remoteness. Frequently, visiting the Ethiopians is given as a reason for the absence of unavailability of a god or goddess. The Ethiopians themselves have the reputation of being unusually good providers of sacrifices to the gods. Here are some excerpts from Greek writings in regards to the influence on their religion and culture that they received from the Apharinca known as Africans. Within Homer's Iliad 1.423 to 424 from the 8th century BCE, Thetis speaks to Achilles. Zeus went yesterday to ocean to a feast with the blameless Ethiopians, and all the gods followed. Then in Homer's Illiad 23.205 to 207, Iris speaks to the winds, saying there is no time to sit. To the streams of ocean, to the land of the Ethiopians, where they offer a hecatomb to the gods, I go once again, so as to receive my share of the feast. We also find in Homer's Odyssey 1.22 to 26, Poseidon's visit is an example of the special relationship between the gods and the Ethiopians, but Poseidon was visiting the far-off Ethiopians, the Ethiopians who are divided in half, the remotest of men, some of whom live where the sun god sets and some where he rises. There, Poseidon, receiving a hecatomb of bulls and rams, delighted in sitting at the feast. Hesiod's Theogony 984 to 985 from 700 BC recounts the genealogy of the Greek gods and the origin of the world. To Tithonus, Eos bore bronze-armored Memnon, king of the Ethiopians, and the Lord Emathion, and in Homer's Iliad 3.2 to 6 the Trojans entering battle are compared to cranes attacking the pygmies, and it reads as follows: The Trojans went with a clamor and shout like birds, just as the cry of cranes comes from the sky, as they flee storms and heavy rains. Calling out they fly to the streams of ocean, where they bring slaughter and death to the pygmy men. Pliny's account within Natural History 6.187 of the origins of the name Ethiopia from eponymous King Ethiops also relates to burning. The whole people had the name Etheria, then Atlantia, and last Ethiopia, after Ethiops the son of Vulcan. It is no wonder that these remote places produce people and animals strange in appearance, through the speed and skill of fire to mold their bodies and sculpt their features. Like Ethiopia, myths involving other parts of Africa accentuate the remoteness of Africa. Io ends her flight in Egypt. The Pygmies live in Africa on the shores of ocean, and, in the version of the Troy story in which Helen does not go to Troy, Africa conceals her as covered in our two-part webisode, The African and Phoenician Realities of Troy Parts 1 and 2. In the previous webisodes, Hel, Hellenes, and the Draconian Demon Race Parts 1 and 2, in regard to the Hellenes, we acknowledge that they attribute their rise from their capital of Athens, where they received guidance from tutelary gods. A tutelary is a deity or a spirit who is a guardian, patron, or protector of a particular place, geographic feature, person, lineage, nation, culture, or occupation. The etymology of tutelary expresses the concept of safety and thus of guardianship. These gods or guardians are the same deities who were revered and seen as guardians in Egypt by the Carbon Organic Malians with whom they resided. Cecrops was represented in the Attic legends as the author of the first elements of civilized life, such as marriage, the political division of Attica into 12 communities, of which in the Hebrew Torah, the number 12 has a number of different meanings and is also a significant number in Jewish mysticism and numerology. Cecrops is said to be the introducer of a new mode of worship. The new mode of worship introduced was a watered-down version of the ancient Carbon Organic Egyptian and Babylonian mystery systems, which became the basis for the religions of the West, namely Judaism, Islam, and Christianity in their present forms. Also, it was a means of remaining in control of this newly civilized tribes. It was said that Cecrops was to have been the first who deified Zeus from his humble beginnings into the leader of the patriarchal pantheon, and ordained sacrifices to be offered to him as the supreme deity. Cecrops was likewise affirmed to have been the first who built altars and statues of the gods, offered sacrifices, and instituted marriage among the Athenians, who, before his time, it seems, lived promiscuously. Pausanias tells us that he forbade the sacrificing of any living creatures to the gods, as well as any sort of other offering, only allowing cakes formed into the shape of an ox with horns, called by the Athenians Peloponnese, which signifies an ox. He is likewise said to have taught his subjects the art of navigation, and for the better administration of justice and intercourse among them. During his reign, which lasted for 50 years, Athena became the patron goddess of the city of Athens. Remember, Athena is an amalgamation of the Malian town of Anti. The name of Cecrops occurs also in other parts of Greece, especially where there existed a town named Athene, such as in Boeotia, where he is said to have founded the ancient towns of Athene, in Euboea, which also had a town named Athene. From these traditions it appears that Cecrops must be regarded as a hero of the Pelasgian race, and Muller justly remarks that the different mythical personages of this name connected with the towns in Boeotia and Euboea are only multiplications of the one original hero whose name and story were transplanted from Attica to other places. The later Greek writers describe Cecrops as having immigrated into Greece with a band of colonists from Sais in Egypt. This would make sense knowing that the Malians had made their way from Egypt along with or as a part of the Danaans. We discussed Sais within our earlier webisodes, so let's take a further look at the Egyptian city and its relation to the Anatolian mainland. Sais was an ancient Egyptian city in the western Nile Delta on the Canopic branch of the Nile. On its ruins today stands the town of Sa el Hagar. Hagar, according to the book of Genesis, was an Egyptian slave, a handmaiden of Sarah whom Sarah gave to her own husband Abraham as a wife to bear him a child. Abraham is the patriarchal progenitor of the biblical Israelites, Ishmaelites, and Midianites. Abraham's firstborn son, through Hagar the Carbon Organic Egyptian, Ishmael, became the progenitor of the Ishmaelites, generally taken to be the Arabs known as Hagrites or Hagarenes. These were the early Arab conquerors of Mesopotamia, Syria, and Egypt, and the name was used in Christian literature and Byzantine chronicles for Hanif Arabs and later for Islamic forces as a synonym of the term Saracens. Herodotus wrote that Sais is where the grave of Osiris was located and that the sufferings of the god were displayed as a mystery by night on an adjacent lake. The city's patron goddess was Neith, whose cult is attested as early as the first dynasty of Egypt. Herodotus, Plato, and Diodorus Siculus identified her with Athena and hence postulated a primordial link to Athens. Diodorus recounts that the original Carbon Organic Athenians of those of Aten known as Atenists originally built Sais before the deluge. While all Greek cities were destroyed during that cataclysm, including Athens, Sais, and the other Egyptian cities survived. In Plato's Timaeus and Critias around 395 BC, 200 years after the visit by the Greek legislator Solon, Sais is the city in which Solon receives the story of Atlantis from an Egyptian priest, its military aggression against Greece and Egypt, and its eventual defeat and destruction by God's punishing catastrophe. Herodotus wrote that Sais is where the grave of Osiris was located and that the temple of Sais had a medical school associated with it, as did many ancient Egyptian temples. The medical school at Sais had many female students and apparently women faculty as well, mainly in gynecology and obstetrics. An inscription from the period survives at Sais and reads, "I have come from the school of medicine at Heliopolis and have studied at the woman's school at Sais, where the divine mothers have taught me how to cure diseases." Sais and its inhabitants on the Canopic branch of the Nile Lower Egypt was a great influence upon the early Pelasgians and their descendants as well as the later Athenian Hellenic populations whose patron deity was the carbon organic deity Neith known as Athena. Yet the Hellenes were patriarchal, which manifests in their adoption of the carbon organic African matriarchal cultures and customs into their subsequent Hellene mythos and later institutionalized religions of the West. According to the Athenian Hellenes, Cecrops was the first man to offer sacrifices to the goddess Athena after her birth from the head of Zeus, and he established her ancient shrine on the Acropolis. In this we see a subtle change by the Hellenes with the introduction of matriarchal to patriarchal rulership, as now Zeus, being a male deity, is now able to give birth to the female deity. This is a common theme, as we will see in regard to going against and overriding the matriarchal divine feminine aspect of nature. In the next webisode, we will explore the transfer by the Hellenes from matriarchal to patriarchal gods. Two primary carbon organic ancient African deities were transported along with the colonists from Sais, being both Set correctly known as Sudak and Neith. The worship of Set originally centered at Nut. Nut, with its vast cemetery at nearby Nakata, was the principal pre-dynastic center in Upper Egypt. The town lost its preeminent position with the unification of Egypt about 3050 BCE, which was carried out under kings whose capital was Abydos and whose royal god was Horus. Originally Set was a sky god, lord of the desert, master of storms, disorder, and warfare. Set embodied the necessary and creative element of violence and disorder within the ordered world. In the early dynastic period of Egypt, circa 3150 CE, 2613 BCE, he was an important and benevolent god of Upper Egypt whose name was invoked for love spells and inscribed on amulets which served as love charms. He was also the deity who saved the sun god Ra from the serpent Apophis, an evil creature who tried to stop the sun god's journey through the night sky toward dawn. Egyptologist Richard H. Wilkinson comments on this myth and Set's role as hero, writing, "It was said that each night Apophis hypnotized Ra and the entourage who sailed with him except for the god Seth, who resisted the serpent's deadly stare and repulsed him with the thrust of a great spear. In doing so, Set assured that the sun would rise the next morning. Set was also seen as a benefactor who helped the people in life and provided for them after death, but by the time of the New Kingdom 1570 C, 1069 BCE, he came to be best known as the first murderer, who killed his older brother Osiris to reign over the world and then tried to murder Osiris' son Horus. To the Greeks, he was associated with Typhon, the god monster who challenged the might of Zeus and was hurled into Tartarus. During the rule of the Hyksos invaders 1630 to 1521 BCE, Seth was worshipped at their capital, Avaris, in the northeastern Nile River Delta, and was identified with the Canaanite storm god Baal. The Ramesside pharaohs, 1292 to 1075 BCE, originating in the northeastern Delta, ranked him among the great gods of Egypt, used his name in their personal names such as Seti I and Seti II, and promoted the image of Seth as the protector of Re in the prow of his bark, slaying Re's enemy, Apopes. Horus struggled with Seth forms the theme of the Ramesside text The Contending of Horus and Seth, which borders on satire, and the later, much more somber version recorded by Plutarch, in which Seth is the embodiment of the Greek demon Typhon. In the first millennium BCE, his name and image were effaced from many monuments. He was now identified as a god of the eastern invaders of Egypt, including the Persians. No longer able to reconcile Seth with Horus, the Egyptians equated the former with evil and the demon Apopes, or with the Greek Typhon. According to Herman T. E. Velde, the demonization of Set took place after Egypt's conquest by several foreign nations in the Third Intermediate and Late periods. Set, who had traditionally been the god of foreigners, thus also became associated with foreign oppressors, including the Kushite and Persian empires. It was during this time that Set was particularly vilified, and his defeat by Horus widely celebrated. The Greeks would later associate Set with Typhon and Yahweh. Set and Typhon also had in common that both were sons of deities representing the earth, being both Gaia and Geb, who attacked the principal deities Osiris for Set and Zeus for Typhon. During the Second Intermediate Period 1650 to 1550 BCE, a group of Near Eastern peoples, known as the Hyksos literally, rulers of foreign lands, gained control of Lower Egypt and ruled the Nile Delta from Avaris. They chose Set, originally Upper Egypt's chief god, the god of foreigners and the god they found most similar to their own chief god, Hadad, as their patron. Set then became worshipped as the chief god once again. The Hyksos king Apophis is recorded as worshipping Set exclusively, as described in the following passage. He chose for his lord the god Set. He did not worship any other deity in the whole land except Set. Papyrus Salyer I, Apophis and Seqenen. When Nommos I overthrew the Hyksos and expelled them in 1522 BCE, Egyptians' attitudes towards carbon organic Asiatic foreigners became xenophobic, and royal propaganda discredited the period of Hyksos rule. The Set cult and Avaris flourished, nevertheless, and the Egyptian garrison of Amos stationed there became part of the priesthood of Set. The founder of the 19th dynasty, Ramesses I, came from a military family from Avaris with strong ties to the priesthood of Set. Several of the Ramesside kings were named after the god, most notably Seti I, literally, man of Set, and Setnak, meaning literally, Set is strong. In addition, one of the garrisons of Ramesses II held Set as its patron deity, and Ramesses II erected the so-called year 400 stela at Pyramus, commemorating the 400th anniversary of the Set cult in the Nile Delta. Set also became associated with foreign gods during the New Kingdom, particularly in the Delta. Set was identified by the Egyptians with the Hittite deity Teshub, who, like Set, was a storm god, and the carbon organic Canaanite deity Baal, being worshipped together as Sethbaal. Now let's look at the relationship with Neith, who was an early ancient Egyptian deity. She was said to be the first and the prime creator, who created the universe and all it contains, and that she governs how it functions. She was the goddess of the cosmos, fate, wisdom, water, rivers, mothers, childbirth, hunting, weaving, and war. Neith was the tutelary deity of Sais, where her cult was centered in the western Nile delta of Lower Egypt. It is attested as early as the First Dynasty. Neith is one of the most ancient deities associated with ancient Egyptian culture. Flinders Petrie noted the earliest depictions of her standards were known in pre-dynastic periods, as can be seen from a representation of a Bart bearing her crossed arrow standards in the pre-dynastic period, as is displayed in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. It has been theorized that Neith's primary cult point in the Old Kingdom was established in Sais, which is modern Sa el Hagar, by Horaha son of Narmer, the pharaoh who unified Egypt of the First Dynasty, in an effort to placate the residents of Lower Egypt by the ruler of the unified country. Her cult regained cultural prominence again during the 26th dynasty when worship at Sais flourished again, as well as at Esna in Upper Egypt. Neith's symbol and part of her hieroglyph also bore a resemblance to a loom, and so in later syncretization of Egyptian myths by the Greek ruling class of that time she was conflated with Athena, a Greek deity of war and weaving. She was considered to be eldest of the ancient Egyptian deities, and Neith is said to have been born the first, in the time when as yet there had been no birth. Proclus, 412 to 485 AD, wrote that the Adeton of the Temple of Neith in Sais, of which nothing now remains, carried the following inscription: I am the things that are, that will be, and that have been. No one has ever laid open the garment by which I am concealed. The fruit which I brought forth was the sun. The Greek historian Herodotus, 484 c. 425 BC, noted that the Egyptian citizens of Sais in Egypt worshipped Neith. The Greeks sought to draw a syncretic relationship to associate Egyptian deities with those of Greece. They identified Neith with Athena. The Timaeus, a dialogue written by Plato, mirrors that identification with Athena, possibly as a result of the identification of both goddesses with war and weaving. The English Egyptologist E. Wallace Budge suggested that the Christian biblical account of the flight into Egypt as recorded in the Apocryphal Gospels was directly influenced by stories about Isis and Horus. Budge argued that the writers of these Gospels ascribed to Mary, the mother of Jesus, many peculiarities which, at the time of the rise of Christianity, were perceived as belonging to both Isis and Neith. For example, the parthenogenesis concept shared by both Neith and Mary. Neith has been speculated by some scholars, such as J. Gwyn Griffiths and Jan Assmann, to be the actual goddess depicted in the 1st and 2nd century Greek historian Plutarch's description of the Veil of Isis. The veiled Isis is a motif which associates her with mystery and ceremonial magic. Plutarch described the statue of a seated and veiled goddess in the Egyptian city of Sais. He identified the goddess as Athena, whom the Egyptians considered to be Isis. However, Sais was the cult center of the goddess Neith, whom the Greeks compared to their goddess Athena, and could have been the goddess that Plutarch spoke of. As we can clearly evidence, the Carbon Organic Ethiopians have been mentioned favorably, reverently, and more than any other nations by the ancient Carbon Organic tribes, families, and clans of the Peloponnese. Most of the gods of Greece had African origins. Herodotus, the most famous and most thorough of Greek historians, said almost all of the names of Greek gods came into Greece from Egypt. And remember that Egypt has been described as the daughter of Ethiopia. Zeus, the father of all gods, was of Ethiopian ancestry, as we will explore in part 2 of this webisode. Zeus sired a mulatto son named Epiphus. Famed tragic poet Aeschylus said of Zeus, "And thou shalt bring forth black Epiphus." Io bore him after she arrived at the banks of the Nile. One of the titles of Zeus was Ethiop, which meant black, and we have dedicated a whole webisode showing that Hercules had African origins. The goddess Diana of Attica was black and Ethiopian. It was Apollo who took her away from her country. It was the Greek city of Corinth where Carbon Organic Venus was adorned and worshipped. The Carbon Organic Virgin Isis was worshipped many centuries after the advent of Christianity. Africans were called the favorites of gods and the most just of men. According to Dr. William Mitford, in his book History of Greece, there were Ethiopian colonies in Greece, and the Oracle of Delphi had Negroid features. As we have shown in the Egyptian and Phoenician realities of Troy, History remembers the Ethiopian king from Meroe who came to aid the Trojans in the defense of Troy, and our previous webisode showed George Wells Parker claims that the Great Greek years were due to African influence. Ethiopians are found in Homer's Illiad and Odyssey, as well as in the works of Euripides, Herodotus, Aeschylus, and Hesoid. In Homer stressed that black Ethiopians were the dominant people in India, Asia, and in their own country. To the ancient carbon organic peoples of the Peloponnese Ethiopia and its people were favorite and familiar topics with leading poets, historians, and geographers, and are credited for being the source of all religions of the Western world, which we will further explore in the webisode Biblis, the book of the carbon organic Phoenician Greeks. We hope you have enjoyed this webisode and have increased you learning. Please comment, subscribe, and hit notifications, and we will be back in part 2 of the webisode entitled African and Phoenician Matriarchal Deities Become Hellenistic Patriarchal Gods. Peace all. Join us on the next episode as we continue to unravel the mysteries of our past to create a better blueprint for the future for all fallen humanity. This series, The Claim of Thrones, will take you on a journey through the universe, across the galactic heavens to the eventual seeding of the planet Earth. This series will also cover the hidden realities of how humanity came about, the various cataclysms and restarts, and follow the various bloodlines of indigenous rights of inheritance. This narrative sets the sacred record straight in regards to who's who on the planet Earth and begins the journey of the lawful reversion and restitution for the heirs of Mother Earth. If you like this content, please subscribe and hit the notification button, as well as support across our many social media platforms.